Locked On Podcast Network presents Locked On Sports Today.
The Minnesota Timberwolves couldn't lose. The Dallas Mavericks needed to win. So what gave way in Game 5? Where does Luka Doncic's performance in this series rank? And the Miami Dolphins ensure that their best wide receiver duo in franchise history sticks around together just a little while longer. I'm Ross Jackson in for Peter Bukowski, and you are Locked On Sports Today.
I'm Peter Bukowski, starting your day with the can't-miss stories and biggest debates in sports. You're Locked On Sports Today.
Searching all major sports. Found.
Let's start with the biggest story.
The Dallas Mavericks are going to the NBA Finals, and almost as excited as every Dallas Mavericks fan is right now, my good friend here, Nick Angstead of Locked On Mavs, is maybe 10 times as excited as everybody else. Nick, let's just start off with the fact that these guys, the Dallas Mavericks, are headed back to the NBA Finals. How incredible has this season been so far?
This season has been so many things. Redemption, ascension, establishment. It's been validation. It's been so many things. This Mavericks team a year ago was sitting at home wondering, how did we just miss the entire postseason? 10 teams out of 15 make the postseason in the Western Conference, and the Mavs were not one of them last year with a top 5 player. An abject disaster for that team. And you look at this team, they made moves, and there's many reasons why the Dallas Mavericks would not be right where they are right now if they don't miss the postseason. First of all, being Derek Lively. They missed the postseason. They keep their draft pick. They draft Derek Lively after the draft day trade, and he was absolutely invaluable to them. A 20-year-old rookie center, it's unheard of for a team to even make the playoffs if you have a rookie center playing that much. The last rookie center to play 25 minutes a game and make the playoffs on like a 50-win team was Al Horford in 2008, and then like Yao Ming in 2003. It just doesn't happen that much. So for Derek Lively to be that big of a piece was massive. Nico Harrison was forced, his hand was forced to make moves and to bring guys around. So he gets Derek Lively. He's aggressive and goes get Omax Prosper for the future. He gets Derek Jones Jr. He makes the trades for PJ Washington and Daniel Gafford. He brings in Dante Exum as a guy that he signed and brought in. Like, absolutely amazing that this team is back where they are right now from where they were a year ago. It's insane to see this. And then even there were times during this season where you go, this team cannot defend to save their lives. And they made the trades at the deadline. And then even then, they had a stretch where they lost 5 out of 6 games. It looked like all of a sudden, the terrible defense is back again. These trades didn't fix everything. And I even got to the point where I was like, man, I think they need a different voice as the head coach. And now here we are. This team completely turned around. They've got the best defense in the NBA. They've got 2 guys that can absolutely just kill you at any moment. They can be the 2 best players in the series in Luka and Kyrie. And they were in Game 5 against the Timberwolves. That's why they won this series. And that's why they are where they are right now.
And speaking of those 2 guys, Luka and Kyrie, we talked about them, you and I, on this very show earlier this week about how they would have to be the difference in Game 5. They combined for 72 of the 124 points that the Dallas Mavericks scored. That's pretty dang good. Is that what you're hoping? I mean, obviously that's what you're hoping to see, but can they sustain that going into the finals up against the Boston Celtics?
Yeah, this Boston Celtics defense is very good. They have some great wing defenders. Obviously, they have 2 great guard defenders. It's a very different defense than what the Mavs just faced. It's a lot less size. It's a lot more of a team defensive concept and things like that. But when Luka and Kyrie are playing the way that they are right now, there's really not a defense you can throw at Luka that he hasn't seen before, that he's not going to be able to figure out at some point. And he figured out this Minnesota defense was the best in the NBA. And there were some metrics that said they were one of the best defenses of all time, considering how much offense had been given such an advantage this season, and the Minnesota Timberwolves defense was still that good. And so you give Luka the ball and you roll it out, and it doesn't matter who he's with. If he's got lob threats, he's got 3-point shooters, he's got Kyrie on his side to be able to pick up where he leaves off. Like, it just is, he just can answer so many different questions. And so this Mavericks team, it's going to be tough, but they're not going to go in scared by any means. This is not where you go, man, this team is just so overmatched by what this Boston Celtics team can put out there on the court. It's not that case anymore. And that's an amazing thing to say, considering even back in that stretch where they lost 5 of 6 games I mentioned, they got destroyed by the Boston Celtics in one of those games. And now you're looking at facing them in the NBA Finals.
All right, so now you've seen that. Now you've seen those matchups. You've seen sort of the way that Dallas Mavericks have handled themselves here throughout the series. I'm asking Nick, not what we think Jason Kidd's looking at, not what we think the Dallas Mavericks are looking at, but I'm asking Nick, what is one of the most important things, if not the most important thing, that the Mavericks have to get right in the NBA Finals to walk away Finals champions?
They have to get right their identity, and their identity has got them to where they are now. Lead with defense, be the hustle team, stay big. I think that it could be easy for the Mavericks to try and, all right, we've got to match this Boston Celtics team that's going to spread you out. They're going to have three-point shooters on the floor. They win when they dominate from three and they hit a bunch of threes. And it could be easy for the Mavericks to try and play, all right, well, let's get away from what we've been doing. Let's play Maxi Kleber at the 5 and play this small ball type, lineup where we spread the floor and try and play 5 out. They've got to lean into their centers. Daniel Gafford, Derek Lively, you have to play those guys because that's what's been the backbone of your team. That's what's been what's made this team a great defensive team at this point. They need to lean into that. And then some things, like there's just not a game plan for, and Jason Kidd has said this at a certain point, the scheme is on offense is Luka and Kyrie. That's the scheme. The coach has said that several times. And so there really isn't like they can't fall into this trap, blah, blah, blah. Luka and Kyrie just got to go out and do their thing. And that's sort of the beauty of this team. And that could also be one of the confounding things about this team is if they aren't going, it looks like game 4 against the Timberwolves where they just didn't have it. They lose the game, even if their defense was still very good. And so it's those two guys and it's sticking with their identity that got them here.
Stay up to date on the Dallas Mavericks all year long by subscribing to Locked On Sports Today and Locked On Mavs on your favorite podcast app and on YouTube. Thanks for making Locked On Sports Today your first listen. Coming up next, we're going to get the perspective from the Wolves side of what went down in Game 5. Before we get to that, though, Hard Knocks has chosen which team they will cover this season. With killer last-minute deals, all-in pricing, and their best price guarantee, Game Time takes the guesswork out of buying tickets. They're obsessed with helping you find ways to save money on your tickets. Game Time has deals on tickets right up to the start of the event, and even an hour after it starts, it's the place to find last-minute seats. You can find exclusive flash deals and sponsored deals on tickets for football, basketball, baseball, concerts, comedy, theater, and much more. With zone deals, you pick the section, and Game Time picks the seats for big-time savings. And with the Game Time guarantee, that means you'll always get the best price. If you find tickets in the same section and row for less, Game Time will credit you 110% of the difference. So take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, and new users are going to get $20 off of your first purchase with promo code Locked On. Terms apply. That's code LOCKEDON for $20 off of your first purchase with Game Time. Download the Game Time app today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. If you're catching this episode after checking out your favorite Locked On show, take a moment to subscribe to Locked On Sports Today on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts so you never miss an episode. The Chicago Bears are officially your Hard Knocks team in 2024. The Bears have never before been featured on Hard Knocks, which has followed NFL teams through training camp since 2001. Bears chairperson Georgia McCaskey has long been opposed to the idea of allowing HBO access to the Bears and everything going on behind the scenes as they prepare for their season opener, and did say that his stance on appearing in the special program had not changed back in the league meetings in March. The Bears are, though, the first team that has been selected for Hard Knocks with a rookie quarterback that they took at number 1 overall since the Cleveland Browns, who were featured back in 2018 with Baker Mayfield. The first episode will air on HBO at 9 p.m. Eastern Time on August 6th. The New Orleans Saints announced on Thursday that their greatest player of all time, Drew Brees, is the lone inductee for the team's Hall of Fame this year.
This is a tremendous honor, and I am so grateful to everybody here, and forever will be. Once a Saint, always a Saint, and I will be living and dying with the team every Sunday, as most of you will as well.
Over on the diamond, the Astros avoided the sweep against the Mariners.
And they scored for the first time in 8 games, actually. They scored in more than 1 inning this game. So
yeah, and this is the first time they did it with 7 games straight. And so this is the first time they would have set a like major league mark if they would have done it. But I guess that's what you have to do if you want to win. You have to score more often than just in one inning. That's breaking news. I didn't know this. And so I guess Joe Espada didn't know this. The Astros didn't know this. So this is something that you have to do. You have to score more early and you have to score often. And that's kind of what the Astros did in this game. So I'm not going to, I'll give them credit for winning this game. I'll give Spencer Arrighetti a lot of credit. But they still missed the ball here. They could have gained some ground on the Mariners in this whole series.
The Tigers dominated the Red Sox.
And the momentum that's building around the Detroit Tigers, who are once again back to 500, now 28-28, 14-13 on the road. And with a 7-game road trip on tack, it's always good to start with a victory. And I know I point out the obvious there, but this road trip gets off to a promising start by shutting out the Boston Red Sox, which always feels good. Born Cool checking in. What up, though, Jay? Glad to shut these guys out. Absolutely. Benetti said it as he signed off on the broadcast. First shutout at Fenway Park since 2014. S-Dogs checking in. Looks like another good output from the offense. Indeed, it was. 3 home runs and a really good at-bat from Mark Canha on an RBI single. And there you go. Good on you, Jack Flaherty.
Well, that stunk. And look, not because of the Minnesota Timberwolves, okay? It's simply that I wanted more from that series and from these superstars. And I have a feeling that a lot of folks are going to want a lot more when it comes to the Minnesota Timberwolves and watching them play next year, because they're going to be a lot of fun. Here to help us break down Game 5, what happened with the Minnesota Timberwolves and where they go from here has Ben Beacon from Locked On Wolves. Ben, let's start off here with the game itself. Game 5, 124-103 was not the result from a couple different directions that I'm sure Minnesota Timberwolves fans were looking for. But what was it that kind of went wrong here in Game 5?
Yeah, there was a lot that went wrong. They trailed by as many as 36 in this game, which in an elimination game, a closeout game for the Mavs is unexpected to say the least. And the crazy thing is, I mean, you started by saying you wanted more. I mean, not just from a Wolves perspective, but basketball fans were expecting more. Every single game in the series to this point, I think the stat TNT had was the first 4 games were decided by the fewest total number of points of any first 4 in a conference finals in history, is like 16 points. The first game was a 3-point loss for the Wolves. The second game was a 1-point loss. So this was a much more competitive series, as fun as Wolves Nuggets was in the second round. 6 of those 7, 5 of those 7 games were really kind of blowouts. This was a great series until Game 5, and this was really a case of like, we have to give Luka Doncic all the props. I mean, he was unbelievable. He had 36, but he had 20 in the first quarter, and he hit 2 like 30+ foot threes from the left wing over Ant. Like,
had Snoop Dogg looking like, oh my goodness, what's going on?
That's how the game started, and then from that point forward, you expected the Wolves to punch back at some point because it's an elimination game, but it never really happened in like a sincere way. And so it just was Luka being Luka. And then the Wolves, like, you got to have more juice in a closeout game, and they just didn't. And then, the Wolves stars ended up with good numbers for the game, but a lot of that was trying to play catch up. And the problem was beyond that. They missed a lot of open shots early. And Luka was Luka. And this was a really tough matchup, as it turned out, for a really legitimately great Wolves defense. Luka Doncic just did Luka Doncic things.
Yeah, absolutely. And look, it's hard to defend when one of the NBA's best and a potential future Hall of Famer is playing up to that level. You mentioned that the Minnesota Timberwolves stars showed up. It felt like in this game, maybe the supporting cast wasn't as strong as it was in Game 4. Did you feel that way as well? And is that kind of symptomatic of something that you've seen from the Wolves, particularly at home throughout the season?
In the playoffs, yeah. I mean, we certainly haven't seen the consistency out of that. I would say early in the game, Anthony Edwards kind of, like, again, he ended up with good numbers, and 10 of 18's fine, 28, 9 and 6, only 1 turnovers. That's good. He was 4 of 6 outside the arc. That's good. But he just, like, watching Ant all year, you could tell early on in the game when Dallas loaded up on him, and they were legitimately trapping him nearly out to center court to try and force the ball out of his hands, which is something the Wolves didn't do enough of, I don't think, with Luka over the course of the series until late in the series. And so they were forcing the ball out of his hands, but Ant wasn't looking to attack like we'd seen him do when teams had put 2 on the ball previously. Phoenix, Denver, he had a couple clunkers in there, but for the most part, he was a killer. And that's why people were talking about him the way they were, over the past several weeks, because he was incredible. And he was just a little too, I don't want to say passive, but maybe too patient in this game when he needed to get going earlier. And then when he did pass out of those doubles, it's what you were talking about. They missed open threes. I mean, Cat was good. He was maybe the Wolves' best player in this game, but he was 1 of 6 outside the arc. Slow-Mo ended up shooting too many threes in this game. He was 1 of 4. Kyle Anderson. Nas was 0 of 4 from outside the arc. Jaden missed a couple early threes, and he made some really in what was effectively garbage time. So it was yes, the role players didn't do what they needed to do, and it started with Ant, who I think had a rough start, and then it kind of snowballed. And when these role players were missing these open threes, on the other side, Dallas's were making those open threes, and that's really what kind of made up the rest of that difference.
So as you look to the offseason here for this Minnesota Timberwolves team, look, you're going to have Anthony Edwards coming in a whole year older, another year of experience and all that. But what does this team need to add over the offseason to maybe get past that conference final hump going into next year?
Yeah, they're in a tough spot cap wise, not to get too in the weeds on that, but like they're over the first apron. They're likely, I mean, like Kyle Anderson's a free agent and that's $9 million or so, but they're going to need to shed some additional salary if they want to get below that. So there's always a chance they take a swing and they trade somebody like Karl Anthony Towns or Naz Reid. I don't think they'll trade either one of them. Sitting here right now, they're certainly not trading Ant. They're not going to trade Rudy Gobert. I don't think they make one of those big swings. So I think this becomes a little bit like what Denver did last year, where they tried to backfill veteran guys that left in free agency, like Bruce Brown and Jeff Green with rookies and second year guys. I worry the Wolves are going to have to do that. And the difference, of course, is Denver won the title last year. The Wolves got to the conference finals. But they also have Ant, who's ascending. And Jokic was the best player in the world for the past several years. And Ant isn't. He's like, probably a top 12 player, but he's so young that if he takes that Jokic-like leap next year, they could be right back in this spot, even if they just make some, moves around the edges. So I think it's going to have to be a little bit more of a patient offseason. They do need a second playmaker, somebody who can initiate offense and score for themselves in the backcourt. Mike Conley's great, and he's under contract. They extended him already. He'll be back. But they need somebody who they can go to if Ant is having an off game, or someone who can, pump, fake, and drive and punish the defense for loading up on Ant. Cat, in theory, is that guy. He wasn't that guy in this round, and it's a little clunkier with him and Rudy both being bigs, obviously. So I think they need somebody else, a guard, a wing, who can attack off the dribble and provide some playmaking and some scoring, really, in addition to Anthony Edwards.
And just real quick, when it comes to Minnesota Timberwolves fans, it's hard not to still feel positive about this team, I imagine, going into next year. So what is there to still be excited about when it comes to the Timberwolves?
Yeah, I mean, they won 56 games, and most people had them. I think Vegas had them. I think FanDuel had them at 44 wins over under, and they obviously crushed that. They're the only team in the league that did not lose 3 straight games all regular season, and including the playoffs, they never lost 4 straight games all year long. And that's something to be proud of for this team. The defense was so good this year. It had only the second time in the last 20 years that we've seen a gap as big between the number 1 and number 2 defense in the league in terms of defensive rating, once in the last 20 years and like twice in the last 30 years or something like that. So it was a legitimately, I would argue, generational defense, certainly the best we've seen in over a decade. And it traveled. It got them to the conference finals, and it took a Herculean Luka Doncic performance to take them down. So I think the defense, the fact that this team was able to stop losing streaks before they started, which was in large part due to the defense, and Anthony Edwards was getting crazy, otherworldly comparisons that never should have really happened because of how good he already is at 22. Right. I've already seen floated on Twitter what Luka did in his first conference finals when I think he was 23, and it wasn't even as good as what Ant did really in this series. So the sky is legit the limit for Anthony Edwards, and in turn, this Wolves team, even with cap issues upcoming, I mean, they're still going to have Anthony Edwards, and if he makes a leap, then anything can happen.
Stay up to date all year long on the Minnesota Timberwolves by subscribing to Locked On Sports Today and Locked On Wolves on your favorite podcast app and on YouTube. Coming up, Jalen Waddle is one of the Dolphins' all-time best wide receivers, and now he's going to be paid like it. Dolphins made wide receiver Jalen Waddle one of the highest paid pass catchers in the NFL on Thursday. And in doing so, they assured that their most dynamic and talented wide receiver duo ever sticks together for a few more years, as Locked On Dolphins host Kyle Krabs pointed out.
There's a big picture conversation to be had about how high in the hierarchy of all-time players in this franchise's history, Jalen Waddle is capable of climbing. And I'm going to float around and produce this thing, because it's obviously Duper and Clayton, and there's been some Hall of Fame players otherwise, but the number one player is Mark Duper with 88.69, and then Mark Clayton with 86.43. Jalen Waddle right now through 3 seasons and another 5 under contract is almost halfway there. He's at 33.85 for his receiving yards, and Tyreek Hill at 3,500 yards, sitting 11th all time. Jalen Waddle by the end of this upcoming season could realistically be in the top 8, or I guess top 10, because Tyreek's going to go up there as well. So from the magnitude of Dolphins production and history at the position and obviously pay and compensation and what he's already done, it's hard to take it for granted. And Miami put their money where their mouth is.
You know, it's not very often that you talk about a third-year receiver the way that Kyle Krabs was just talking about Jalen Waddle. And that's just how impressive he's been ever since he came into the NFL in that 2021 NFL draft, which, by the way, he accompanied some other really good wide receivers in that class. Cincinnati Bengals wide receiver Jamar Chase was a part of that class, who might become the next highest paid wide receiver in the league. Devonta Smith of the Philadelphia Eagles was paid earlier this offseason. Now you've got Jalen Waddle. When you draft one of these young wide receivers and you bring them in as a rookie, you just kind of hope you can find a way to help them contribute, learn the system, go out there, make a difference here and there, contribute some. Jalen Waddle has done more than contribute. He has been the model of consistency for Miami ever since arriving in Dade County. 3 straight 1,000-yard receiving seasons. That's pretty impressive. And then you look back at his second season last year, where he had over 1,300 yards, but he also caught 75 passes. 75 passes is a pretty big workload. But when you take 75 passes and also look at the fact that he led the league in yards per reception at over 18 yards per reception, it gives you an even greater appreciation of what it is that he does. Jalen Waddle is a part of a Miami attack that's built on speed. It's built on I'm faster than you are, and you can't do a thing about it. And while I love that about Mike McDaniel's system and what it is that the Miami Dolphins do on that offensive side of the football, it's more than that when it comes to guys like Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle. Get the ball in their hands 6 yards downfield, watch them take it 60. Get the ball in their hands 60 yards downfield, watch them house it, no problem. So pretty good stuff here for the Miami Dolphins. And by the way, not only have they gotten Tyreek Hill taken care of, and not only have they gotten Jalen Waddle taken care of, they're set to soon get Tua Tagovailoa, their quarterback, the most important position on the field, also taken care of, which might have Cincinnati Bengals fans looking at Trey Hendrickson asking for a trade, which won't happen. T. Higgins not yet having an extension or signing his franchise tag. Jamar Chase not yet having his contract signed or getting any type of contract extension at this time. Might have a lot of Cincinnati Bengals fans looking over at Miami going, wow, I wish we could do that. Lions offensive coordinator Ben Johnson is happy to stay in the, quote, sunshine a little bit longer in Detroit. He said, I think that when it all boils down to it, I want the sun to shine a little bit longer. That's really what it comes down to for me. That's what Johnson said when it came to passing on head coaching opportunities and instead staying on as the offensive coordinator for Lions head coach Dan Campbell. And this, of course, was referencing a metaphor that Campbell used in his first year as the team's head coach. Campbell assured the team that the Caribbean was on the horizon for a Lions franchise that has become a little bit more accustomed and used to being in the Arctic Circle and kind of evading icebergs. Of course, things are looking up to the Caribbean for those Detroit Lions these days. And speaking of the Caribbean, I'm going on vacation. I'll see you later. If you're catching this episode after checking out your favorite Locked On show, don't forget to take a moment to subscribe here to Locked On Sports Today on your favorite podcast app and on YouTube so you never miss an episode. And if you're new to Locked On Sports Today, we're here for you every day, breaking down all the biggest stories in sports. Coming up on the next Locked On Sports Today, who will win the NBA Finals and why will it be the Boston Celtics? So at least until tomorrow, stay Locked On Sports Today.
Locked On Podcast Network presents Locked On Sports Today.
For more episodes of Locked On Sports Today, go to our video on demand. Click on Sports at the top of your screen. There, you'll find past episodes of Locked On Sports Today, plus other Locked On shows on demand.